It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
Welcome, everyone. We're back for another podcast. Joining us today, we have Steve Bunda, Peter Lawrence, Chad Juttner, and joining us for the first time, the amazing Dean Duffing. Welcome, Dean.
Greetings, folks.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about estimating, and I'm going to kick it over to one of our experienced estimators, Chad Juttner, to set up the topic for us.
We are going to talk about estimating.
I knew you were going to say that.
This is a follow-up to a conversation we had internally at SDG with our Agile practitioners and a surprising number of developers and a healthy amount of grain belt. And I thought it would be good to get two of our experts on the podcast so that we can talk a little bit more about estimation publicly, because there was a lot of really cool ideas thrown around. And the one takeaway that I think I got from that meeting was that I should not complain because my project I don't have a lot of the problems that other folks have brought up, which is not something I realized until we all chatted.
You know, that's a common theme amongst these types of meetings is you never know how good you have it until you get into a room full of consultants and we talk about our experiences, and then you're like, oh, I'm just going to sit over here and listen.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was, I'm having other challenges, but like Jay-Z said, I got 99 problems. Estimation is not one. So for that, I am very grateful.
I mean, just a little genesis on that whole meeting topic that we had in that community here at SDG. Those of us that are in leadership on that committee could kind of see that there is a disconnect, estimation from varying roles on a given team. So the best way to kind of resolve those disconnects is to get people in a room to help hear other perspectives, because everybody's got a story to tell that's good on estimation and hard on estimation. So it's not, I consider it more of an art than a science myself, but that's just me. So I think that was the value of that discussion, was to get all these different perspectives at the table, which was really cool. I loved it. I thought it was great.
Right. And hearing different from the different roles and hearing the challenges they face. Like, for example, someone brought up, I feel a lot of stress when I'm being forced to estimate things. That never occurred to me. Because I don't look at it that way. I'm coming from the analysis perspective, and I don't care what the data is that you come back with. It's just a data point. Whereas when developers or testers are estimating things and they feel that stress, that hadn't occurred to me, and that was an extremely valuable lesson from that. That was my big takeaway, because we don't want to bury the headline, so I'm not going to bury mine. That was a good takeaway. And then when Chad, you brought up points with empathy, that was whoa, yes. That was totally resonated with me.
Yeah, that was a huge phrase. That really hit. That was good.
And just for a little context, if you were not, we started out by talking about three main things. So we dedicated 30 minutes to each thing. The first was, what is the value we get out of estimating? Followed by, what are the problems we experience with estimating? And then lastly, what are some ideas and things we can do moving forward to make it better or improve it? So that's for a little context.
So where did you guys come down on value?
It's different values for different people, right? I mean, I would say this. I kind of feel like of the values that we had, this is just my takeaway, and maybe others didn't see it that way, is that there's more value for other roles than necessarily the developers all the time. There are some things that were valuable to developers, but to some degree, and Chad, you were on that call, so developers that were in that meeting, please correct me, but it seems like estimation was more of a necessary evil or a chore for developers than it is for the people that consume those estimates or need those estimates, BAs and PMs and things like that. That's just the way what I took away from it, which I get. I used to be a developer at one point in time, a long time ago, but
yeah, it was a little bit of that, right? It is, it's a chore. It's kind of a ritual that we all participate in because we have to, but it's not for us, right? And we get that we need to report up and out and all over the place around like velocity and how much work we can fit into a unit at a time and all the other stuff. But developers themselves, we get some value out of it as we're doing sprint planning and we're doing some estimation as part of that process. Once in a while we uncover a monster in a closet, right? Like, or a skeleton in the closet, whatever the phrase is, I don't know, as part of that process. But as the team matures, I've been lucky enough to work with a mostly static team for now 5 years. Right. So our estimation process at this point, at this maturity level, is way different than when we were just getting to know each other. We didn't know each other's velocity and, we didn't know what we were all about. So now, yeah, it is for us, but we get it. Yeah. You just need to know what we can.
So one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was as people, developers in particular, kind of expressed how they're doing estimates today, their flow and stuff like that. And as primarily a Scrum Master, granted, I'm doing a PM role today too, but I really would rather be doing the Scrum Master work because my passion is building strong teams, and I think that comes through a little bit better in the agile methodologies than it does in waterfall project management. Not impossible, but just it's easier to do. The collaboration that comes out of estimation is one of the values that I see, and that kind of was evident. And when we were talking about the discussion itself being the value proposition for developers that comes out, and not just developers, but QA, the whole team that comes out of the estimation process. But I also don't think everybody's doing it that way. Like Chad, even your instance you were talking about where it was like, you're basically doing the estimation for your team, which is kind of the way I used to do it back in the waterfall days where I was the team lead and I'd do the estimates to provide it all. So the team didn't have to and provide it out to the business. But I really do like the collaboration and the discussion that comes out because sometimes even the most seasoned developer misses something that someone who might be a lower level developer or junior developer, I should say, that had direct experience with something that recently that maybe that senior developer didn't have. So I liked the fact when people were saying, yeah, the discussion is important, but maybe folks aren't getting that from a developer level, at least in the teams that you're experiencing.
Another part of that is where that junior developer might be more afraid of something and be afraid that they're going to be like they're on deck when that story hits the top of the to-do list and they got to grab it. And now they're worried that they can't perform it because we've estimated it as a 1 and there's no way that's a 1 for me and that kind of thing. And I know you try to estimate the same for everybody, but go ahead.
Yeah. So to your point, when I did all the statements of work for my projects that had the estimates built in, and it was my least favorite thing to do. Most of my projects, it was just me going out to do work for a customer. So I've done a lot of estimates, tons of them, but I've never done it as like a larger team. I've had 1 or 2 people I've been the lead of on a project, and what I didn't like even more than doing the estimates was when somebody did the estimate and then I had to go in and do the work. They're writing checks that I had to cash. And oh my gosh. But also what I found was probably my biggest enemy was that I'm a people pleaser. I have this desire. So it's like I would give really like narrow estimates and then I would put myself in these positions of having to deliver and then, just working my tail off and stressing about it the whole time.
You bring up a really interesting point about those estimates that come in ahead of you, because Bryce talked a little bit about that on the sales side, where there's a certain amount of trying to put together an estimate based on very little information and give an estimate that's realistic that we can deliver on, but that the customer has an appetite for. So anyway, Go ahead, Peter. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to agree with. basically the point that you were making is that, sometimes you are making those customer facing estimates with, you've had a 1 hour meeting to talk over the details, and now you need to come up with a 6-week estimate for how long everything's going to take. And it can be challenging. Obviously, experience rolls into that. I was thinking earlier about, like, when did I get into estimating? Well, probably when the project manager asked me how long it was going to take for this thing. Now, as agile teams go, it's much more, specific, and everybody does it. And as long as the whole team participates, I will say that planning poker has made a ginormous difference for my team, because if you don't have a way to force someone to give an estimate, right or wrong, they can give question marks, they can give cups of coffee or infinity or whatever. But if they don't have to give any input to that, then you have no idea what they're thinking about that story. They might have secret information, like you guys were saying. Junior developer with secret information about stuff that they just worked on that took them 3 times as long as they were supposed to. And boy, that would be cool to have mentioned in the estimation meeting. So I have done estimates. I've done the big estimates that I've thrown at Kyle. Probably not Kyle specifically, but gone in, been at the head of the charge, and had somebody come behind and do that work, and been on the receiving end too. And it's a challenge both ways.
Especially when they don't do things like you do.
Well, right.
They're not even using the same approach that you use, or know the limitations of the tool set that you do. Right. I could just go into a negative spiral about that. So I'm going to stop talking.
We're going to stay positive. Dean, you were going to say something.
Yeah. I having been in the world that you guys are in with, estimates being time, right? That's where I really do like the transition out of that into the agile estimation, because of, story points are not time, even though they're often measured that way. Well, that's an issue of the team communicating out, or the Scrum Master communicating out to say, guys, it's not time, right? They use points for a reason, because it's more of an abstract away from a unit of time. Now, the challenge is that the human brain, when you think of effort, how do you not put time into that? Right. So, right. But that's where risk and complexity also play in. You know what I mean? So they want the goal, and the Scrum guy doesn't say points, by the way. It just says estimate. Right. You could use fruit. It doesn't really matter. Right. It's supposed to be some sort of relative sizing, so that way the team doesn't have to focus on exactly how long is this going to take us. And now we've written a timeline into stone. It's about focusing on the problem solving externally, outside of the team. Leadership at the product level and program level should be thinking in terms of targets and roadmaps that are more malleable and can shift. And as long as they're getting communication out to say these things are shifting and why, they're satisfied, right? I mean, that in an ideal world, granted, I realize we're not all working in that environment, but I mean, in an ideal world, that's how it does play out. And I've seen it play out at a few clients that way, and I think that's good.
How do you account for things that you need from the customer? We need to get an outline of every single piece of content that we want to have on this intranet, and I don't know what that is. So I'm going to need your help to put that together. And, there's availability, desire to help, how much, how many people need to be in that room to answer that, and how is that going to work out? Do they have to go away and do some work and then come back? And that's part of how do you account for that?
I would, if it's a sizable initiative, that's where I would use a story map, where I would develop that first, but that's kind of, upfront, upstream from any estimating. That's how I would handle that. And then you could potentially look at your map and go, all right, let's t-shirt size this map before we get into the details and start giving points or fruit or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
I like the idea of doing fruit, by the way. That really has an intriguing aspect to it. And because I want to come back to that. When you said that, I was like, ooh, this could solve one of the problems I have right now, which is when people point things, and you alluded to this, Dean, where you said people equate it to time. Somewhere, somehow, there's always someone who's going to use those estimates for an evil purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Holding, hey, you guys estimated it at this. How come it isn't done or whatever? Or why is our velocity dropping or whatever? And it's like, okay, you're paying too much attention to these points that when we through those points, we're not thinking the same thing you are. So you're holding us to some standard we don't even know exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Every task on this list, you have time against. Oh, you spent half the time on this one task. Okay, we're going to need that money back. We're not going to just look at it as a whole, but starting to piece it out and try to negotiate and stuff. I've had that happen before, and we're doing our best and we're trying, to get the thing done. And at the end of the day, it's like there's the time and materials piece of it, but scope changes too. How do you guys handle those?
They're just things that get reestimated usually. In the agile world, that's just a story that goes in the backlog, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll put that in the backlog for later. Okay, so I've been a huge fan of Fibonacci. I've never done fruit. I've done 1 through 5 where each number is double the previous number. Chad, how about you? What are you guys doing when you estimate? Are you giving hours, seconds?
Yeah, it's I like the Fibonacci, right? Because it's just like, how big is this relative to other things of the same size? I actually don't hate the idea of doing fruit or even Pac-Man fruit, right? Like it's a apple, a cherry, a pretzel, whatever. As the stories get progressively harder, you pick the harder Pac-Man. What are those bonuses?
What is this gibberish I'm hearing? These terms, like I know what the Fibonacci fruit? Sequence is,
right?
But I don't know what Pac-Man is.
Yeah.
I know the game.
Right. There's got to be a scale that everybody understands.
Right.
Okay.
It's just what he's referring to. I've never used the Pac-Man theory either, the Pac-Man method, but I like it. It's along lines of the fruit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the idea is that from a development side, you are trying to break that connection from the upside of people grabbing, Fibonacci 13, that's 2 sprints, and okay, we got that. Now we can do some math on it and figure out how long it's going to be.
I think another thing that came up in that meeting that was kind of interesting is just the whole idea that there's multiple levels of estimating, right? I mean, when you got stuff in a backlog and you have a story that's well written with acceptance criteria, and it's clear if you have that, right? That should be goal 1. That's garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
But if you get to that point, then you can do your point estimating. But there's times you can't. Like, when Kyle, you're talking about at a point where you might not have all the dependencies and requirements from a client, maybe you can't get to that level. Maybe you should be doing T-shirt sizes at that point, which as long as everyone agrees on the scale, that's maybe what's used for like leaders who are budgeting at a year at a time, maybe an extra large is 9 months, and it's a swag, but I mean, that's, you're going to that level first. Like when Steve's talking about story mapping as well, epics or features might be T-shirt sized. Stories, okay, now we're into granular details. We can get down to points, but even then you're still trying to keep it abstracted away from time as much as possible. Not that time isn't a component, but it's not like a direct measurement that someone can get out their slide rule or calculator or whatever and say, well, they should be done by this date, so.
And that's been a concept that I've had real trouble with some folks just grokking at all. They're just like, well, what's a 4? How much is a 4? How much is a 3? I know how many hours I'm going to spend on this. I just need to convert it to your silly fruit scale. That's all I want to do is convert my estimate that I've gotten good at for numbers and convert it to fruit, right?
I've also seen development teams that actually feel comfortable. So therefore, what they do is behind the scenes, they have their own conversion scale of what a point is in how many hours or days or stuff like that, because that's comfortable to them. That's the hard thing. Time is a human thing to measure how big the work effort is. Right? Effort and time, it's really hard to separate those two. It's when you get the risk and complexity in there that are different, right? So that's why you try to abstract it out. But it's a challenge. I mean, everybody does it different.
And don't people naturally like fill the vacuum? So if you give them 5 hours for a task, they'll spend 5 hours on it, even though if you gave them an hour, they would still spend an hour. They would just spend an hour on it and get the same result. Is that accurate?
I can neither confirm nor deny that. I don't know. I'm not a developer.
Peter had a solid reaction.
I say no. I'm there to do the work. I'm there to take the story, resolve the story and satisfy the acceptance criteria. I'm also there to go to the BA several times and say, well, what do you mean by this? What is that? How is this? Okay, can we change the acceptance criteria on this? And if we do that, does that change the estimate? No, probably not. Maybe, yes, who knows? But then we're all clear. Yeah. QA knows what to test. Everybody's on the same page.
But just to be clear, I'm talking about something that's happening unintentionally.
I never sit around and read books to try to fill my story points. I mean,
it takes what it takes.
It takes what it takes. It's all an estimate. I mean, maybe if you estimated 5 hours, you would spend 5 hours. But if you estimate 3 watermelons and 2 cherries, have you spent 3 watermelons and 2 cherries, or are you really stuck at 3 oranges, and that's how long it took? It's an estimate. Who cares what it took? It took what it took. You can write the amount of hours it took you to do after you're done. I'll be able to get it down to the second once I'm done with this. Yeah, an orange, a watermelon, a cherry, who knows how long that takes? I just know that a watermelon is much bigger than a cherry, and so I'm going to expect to work on that most of the time. But if I find a secret function on the internet that actually does all the work for me and takes me one method call to satisfy all the acceptance criteria, okay, took 20 minutes. I got it done. We said it was going to be hard, but it wasn't. Turns out we were estimating poorly.
Do you have other people in the ecosystem that look at your estimates and feel like it's not an estimate? This is now the truth by which we must march towards.
I've had a lot of that happen. So, there's a number of reasons that it happened. But if you're on a massive project, we had a couple of folks that took estimates and literally translated them into hours and time and everything else.
Yeah.
And then got, then we had we had a lot of conversations around like, hey, why is this 2-point story taking 4 days? Like we said earlier, right? We uncovered a couple of things as we started implementing, or you lied. Well, no, that sounds harsh, but like whatever, we found some untruths in the details, and it took a little while longer. Now, I don't like to go back ever and just like change estimates. Like I whatever the original.
There's no point, was, right? It was an estimate.
It's all paperwork, right? Kind of after you've done it, right? So I don't ever really go back and say, oh, this 2 is now a 5 or a 7 or whatever. Leave it at 2, and if it takes 2 weeks, then get better next time, right? We do kind of review what went wrong with some of those. So like obvious misses, like huge misses, we talk about. And again, super fortunate that my team is this mature, because we don't really have those as much anymore. But oh, goodness gracious, early on, maybe that's something to talk about too. Like early in a project,
for sure,
an estimate is like a big guess, right? Like I don't know. I'm gonna say based on past experience, it might be this. But as you've been in somebody's environment for a few months at least, then you start getting a little bit better. But those original estimates, to you guys' point, they still leak out to folks, and some folks translate those into whatever, and you have awkward conversations after a bit.
My experience, you use the word lie, and it's like, well, you're being asked to forecast, which means guess, and which means that it might not happen, it might not play out that way. And you know that, and you can, in your head, feel like you're lying. It's not. You're not deliberately lying. You're taking your best shot at how long it's going to take. With the time estimates, time and money has kind of the maturity from that grown into, we don't want to look at it that way. We don't want to look at it as time and money. We want to look at it as work and whatever you guys call it, cherries, watermelons, stories, Fibonacci's, Pac-Man.
The estimates turn into the deadline.
Yeah.
And then from there, it becomes a problem of, as came up in that meeting, where the deadline becomes more important than the quality.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and morale just gradually goes down because you feel like you're failing, being held to a standard of an estimated thing that where we lacked all the information we needed to give something accurate, but now we're held to that standard, and it's our fault, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you want to go to that person that's giving you that kind of scrutiny, and it's like, okay, say the word estimate back to me. Fixed bid. No, say estimate, fixed bid. Like, okay, that's not working.
Yep.
But that's what happens. That's happened to me. I can't count how many. It's like, well, if it takes 10 hours and I told you 5, then I'm horrible. If I said it was going to take 5 hours and it took 10, that's bad. If I said it was going to take 5 hours and it took 3, I'm a hero. Like, it's all just perception in that case.
Right.
So the desire is then to pad those estimates to account for that extra stuff.
Have you guys? Oh, go ahead, Steve.
No, you go ahead.
So that's a really awesome point right there. Like, nobody remembers it when you do something in a shorter amount of time. Nobody remembers that, but they always remember something that took longer.
All right, Dean, jump in.
I think I've been maybe a little more fortunate than some of you guys, at least in my recent history, as far as how estimates are viewed. Like for one, on most of the Scrum teams I'm on, we're not looking at the individual developer for being accountable for points. It's used as a vehicle for the team to plan what they put in their sprint. Right. And so then when you get to the end of your sprint, hey, did we get it all done or did we not get it all done? How close did we come? If we were way off, then back to Chad's point, hey, then we might have a discussion to try to figure some of that stuff out. And it's typically happening early on in a project or a product implementation because it's gray to us. We don't know, we don't have enough knowledge on it where it takes us a few sprints to get into the rhythm and figure some of this stuff out. But I haven't used it. And interestingly in that meeting, that was not the perspective of developers, but I haven't used it as like, hey, I'm measuring each individual, right? We're using it as a team measurement. And the lead, I've also been fortunate that the leadership that I'm communicating out to is also looking at it that way. I mean, most of these places are somewhat mature that they realize while they haven't necessarily released that thought, even projects where you estimate it out, they're never on time, they're never on budget. Right? For whatever reason, right? That fixed bid is bad because it rarely works, right? Because a fixed bid will put you in some sort of, now we're in the flow of changes. We got change orders coming through for every change, right?
Right.
Where when you're thinking in terms of, story points and roadmaps, you do get an early warning as to, this is our roadmap, and we were thinking we'd have this thing done next month. A month in advance, you can kind of tell, sometimes even a quarter in advance for those long things. So leadership has the ability to refactor because they set a budget for a year. That's the whole thing, is budgeting, and money is a difficult translation to agile teams. Agile teams, you should just be budgeting for the staff of that team, and the team gets done what they can get done. And you keep monitoring that progress so you make sure that they have enough to do, or we're putting them on the right things so you can accomplish what your prioritized roadmap items are for that year, So I've been kind of lucky in that most of recent history, there hasn't been a lot of recriminations about, hey, you didn't get that done on time, So I've been pretty lucky there. But it was pretty obvious in that group discussion that we had that a lot of developers are still in that, there's punitive stages for missing your estimates thing. And that was eye-opening for me. I will say that
I'm going to tell a story really quick. 10-week fixed bid over the holidays, team in a different country, 12 weeks of work in 10 weeks is what it took.
Not fun at all. No, and those type of project estimates versus ongoing agile estimates, I think those are thankfully animals completely. Yeah. To your point, Dean, I don't think I've ever seen an individual developer, unless they're picking up 1-point stories and making them go an entire sprint for multiple times, like that, you're probably not going to be called on that.
Right.
because people are going to see that you're not getting the work done in other ways, right? But if I pick up a 5-point story and it takes me 8 points of time, whoever's doing that, whoever's got that conversion grid on the side, it is what it is. And I don't think I've been a part of a team that's like landed the sprint on all, like everybody finished up their story on the exact end of the sprint. All the testing got done. Woohoo! Never happens. We're usually bringing in something because we're ahead. We're working ahead in the next sprint because we're waiting for QA to get through, and we don't want to bring more work into the sprint because we can't get it done. So why bring it in if you're not going to get it done? I've also been on part of teams where it's carry the heck over. All of just keep bringing it in. We'll carry it over. No big deal. Like, okay, why are we doing this again?
Right.
We just need a big to-do list.
Do you ever run into issues where you're asked to estimate something that has no acceptance criteria?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and may not have. I mean, it's funny because occasionally the product owner will bring up a story into, refinement, and it will have been blank.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's got a title.
Just died.
It's got a title, and they're like, thankfully, they're like, oh, wait, I shouldn't have brought this one in. We all sit around and go, yeah, you think. But yeah, there's certainly ones that don't have acceptance criteria, don't have full acceptance criteria, that we're writing the acceptance criteria in the middle of the meeting, all of that. It's super fun.
I kind of feel jealous of the people that get to work with you guys and you guys that are still doing this stuff. Because when I was doing a lot of this, it was in my younger days, and I could like the tears could start flowing. The pain of going through all that, having to do them in the first place. And then having to, I've had projects where it was me and another developer, and they took all of their time and half of my time. And then I had to scramble. And I never liked scope changes. I never liked disappointing people. It was a hard road. What has changed? We have over 100 years of experience in this room. What has changed since my horrible younger days and now?
I don't know how much has. I think we've just traded other problems, some problems for others. Here's an interesting thing, and I don't know if you've seen this. Sometimes one of the best experiences I had, and I don't know if it was fate, but one of the best experiences I had was early on in my Agile career when the team came in and very few people knew how to do Agile. And we just sort of figured it out as a team and made it work for us. And it was very successful. Since then, I go to teams and people have preconceived notions, and Dean, you remember this, where sometimes somebody's like, oh, Agile won't work here because of whatever. Oh, no, well, we didn't implement it exactly the way we should have, but I know it won't work. Or somebody has some other preconceived notion. And so sometimes those things, a new hindrance where there's baggage. So that's a different problem. I don't know. Anybody else? Different problems today?
I had a similar experience to yours, Steve, where they brought in people to train the team, the project team on Agile. We started from writing stories to doing estimates to all of that stuff, doing more of a Kanban, but everybody was there. That's business. That was everybody was brought into this room. So they spent a week going through it, and you would, learn how to do it. So at the end of that week, everybody was on the same page, which, right or wrong, you're on the same page, which really helps a lot. It's a lot better than having 3 people that used Agile over here and did it poorly, and bringing that experience to somebody that goes to bed every night and reads the Agile manifesto before they go to bed to make sure they still tracking on that, and that kind of thing. I don't know.
One of the weirdest changes that I've been going through is being in an organization that is very, very used to waterfall, right? Mm-hmm. And then going from that to Agile, right, and trying to practice Agile, but then trying to meld the two together. So one weird problem that I'm experiencing is dealing with a waterfall integration, right? Like, we're Agile, right? We do we do all the rituals, we do all the planning, we're working with a team that is very much waterfall. And it makes me appreciate Agile again, right? Because holy smokes, like I just the requirements gathering process alone on the waterfall project leaves no room for adaptation, imagination, anything, right? Like it's a very different experience. And then being an Agile project and being able to, like see problems, realize that our estimates are usually pretty good, and then like take on additional work that waterfall doesn't really allow you to do. It's been great for us because we've been able to pull more work into our project. And it just presents so many like really weird problems on this waterfall project. A small story is anything less than 100 hours, right? They actually tie that 100-hour to a size. So they'll always ask, is it a small, medium, or large? Like, well, if small is 100 hours, then what's a large? And that's basically a presidency, I think. And so I'm like, well, like, yeah, we'll take it on our project. It's just call it a small. And then to somebody's point earlier, we fill the 100 hours with nonsense and book learning. No, we just deliver a lot more value a lot faster than these old monolith projects. I don't even know what the question was. I don't know if I answered the right thing.
Changes. Things that are different now?
Yeah. So like change, I started my career in 97. Steve or Dean said it earlier. We're just swapping out problems, right? Like the Agile process and the estimation process. I like it better than trying to do this big waterfall approach to everything. That said, we still do discovery up front. We still do like a lot of as much discovery as we can before we get to sprint zero and start writing stories and everything else. I went through this with where I'm at right now, and that's super helpful. And it doesn't feel like waterfall-y, right? It's just really like getting being the first man on the beach and trying to figure out like what's going on, what are we signing up for, and how can we start building in this new land. I lost my train of thought.
One thing that I've noticed that's changed over time is my projects are no longer in the red or in the yellow or in the green. I don't know if that's you're laughing, Dean. I don't know if that brings back painful memories of having to color code lots and lots of projects and go through.
Still exists today, though. Still exists today.
I'm sure it does. Thank you for insulating me. But yeah, it's like, well, my project's moving right along. We're hitting our burn rate and we're maintaining it. We're getting faster. We're not slowing down dramatically for some unknown reason, and we're not speeding up dramatically for some unknown reason. We're just plowing along. We know how much we're going to get done in a sprint.
Do you ever cover anything in retrospectives on estimates and where you were spot on, where you missed, and anything like, hey, what are our lessons learned? We thought that was a grape and it was a cantaloupe. Where did we go wrong?
Especially at the beginning.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, that's where our example of a 2-point story that took an entire sprint. Like I always cover those in retros. And it becomes obvious really quick. And by the time you get to retro, it's almost like, do we really need to discuss it again? Because we kind of already know what happened. But I use the retros as an opportunity to like just kind of review like all of the story points that went into a sprint. And I'm not even a Scrum Master. I just want to know, like, as a lead on a project, are we doing are we pulling in enough work? Am I doing a bad job like describing it to the other developers? So I always review like, okay, how much did we do? How many stories like carried over and all the other nonsense, just so I know, like, crap, do I gotta get better? I hope not, because I don't want to. Yeah.
You're happy with the Chad that you are right now, right?
I've settled in, right? This is all you get now. I'm not going to get better. I'm probably not going to get worse.
One question I have for you, Chad.
Yes, sir.
Because you've talked about, like, I've heard you mention your success with the UX team you have and how that incorporates into your work.
Mm-hmm.
How have you solved that? Because that's one conundrum I've always faced, is how does UX fit into the Agile framework? How has it impacted you and your estimates? How has that worked? Because you've talked about it being a success. I think you've mentioned working with Allison before.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, Allison Lorenzo was our UX designer, and it was not only were her designs like spot on almost every time. It was really easy to talk to Allison about the feasibility of some of the designs, right, and the logistics behind some of them, and to mix that in with our timelines and everything else we have to do, right? Like building an internal app, do you want to build in, all of the accessibility stuff and everything else? Well, yeah, in a perfect world, it would be great to have it, but like we've got X number of users, and the additional weight that adds to your project might not be super necessary. And then she was also, I mean, not only was she a great UX designer, she was the best BA that I think I've ever worked with, right? And that wasn't even what she was supposed to be doing. So by the time she presented designs to us, we'd be able to dig into details. Oh, okay, well, and especially early on in the project, like, okay, you've developed this. Is this a reusable thing? Are we gonna start? And she would just know, yes, I think there's going to be like a set of components that are going to be consistent throughout, whatever, right? Calendars, the way they do calendars and dates on my project is very strange. And so the having a good UX/BA, having that role, I mean, especially if they take on a lot of that BA responsibility, man, that made it was like a cheat code on the project, having her around.
So that helped with estimates and then subsequently predictability?
Yeah, because sometimes early on we'd estimate stories high just so that we could build in some reusability, right? If our UX designer can see that being a thing, and we can, I mean, we're not idiots, right? Like calendar widgets are going to be sprinkled throughout everything. But it really helped me early on to have her around to identify those things. Like, hey, let's go high on this because like these components are going to be kind of sticky throughout the application and we want to do a little bit better job here. Or can we start cutting this out? And if we do that, like this is what it means for our velocity, right? I hate the business words like partnership and blah, 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 but she truly was like one of the best partners on the project you could have from a UX perspective. Good UX makes estimates no-brainers within, a couple of sprints of working with the folks.
So we got about 7 minutes left, and you guys have a lot to say, and there's a lot to say on this topic. So I figured I'd start final thoughts a little earlier. So what are your final thoughts on this topic, Peter?
Estimates are required in order to keep a project moving. I don't think you could have an agile project without estimates, honestly. I mean, your backlog would be all weird and stories would be flying all over the place and work would maybe be getting done, but out of order and not well planned. I can't see doing them without it. I'm glad that I've got Steve and Dean in between me and the higher business to help massage that conversation and that discussion around what an estimate means versus the yearly budget should mean. Definitely got to do an estimate for everything.
Steve, any final thoughts, tips, tricks?
I'm going to harken back to something Brandon said where he said, estimating is stressful. I, as the BA, take it kind of personally when the estimate was off. Like I didn't do a good enough job up front defining what that needed to be. And maybe there was a technical explanation for it. Okay, well, I wouldn't have known that. But sometimes I think, okay, that was my fault. I didn't deconstruct this thing well enough. And so I take it personally.
Extreme ownership.
Yeah, I mean, much like Steve, when Brandon's talking about estimation being stressful, I'm also seeing things where developers are feeling like they don't want the points shared because they feel like they're going to be under the gun or things like that. And thankfully for me, I'm seeing that trend in a different way. I'm seeing like the clients that I've been on. I mean, I remember back in the day actually estimating as a project manager and as a team lead. And then for each work stream, I'd put risk contingency of X% on there, like you guys are talking about padding. That's the acceptable way for padding, apparently.
Right.
Even though it's already padded by developers in some cases, right? But that trend I feel like that trend is going away. I mean, I feel like points has kind of helped that. Leadership is looking at trends more than they are at even individual point values. Is like, hey, what is the trend? I show them trends as, hey, here's what our backlog is, and here's about how much this team is getting done. So that would maybe have us get done here. But I also say, here's how much is getting added to our backlog every sprint.
Right.
So it's a shape-shifting monster. We've got to be realistic that we've got to monitor multiple data points to be able to feel comfortable about when we're going to deliver. Because at the end of the day, all they really want to know is, when is my stuff going to be done? And maybe sacrifices are going to have to be made to what done is. Maybe they're willing to pare back scope, things like that. So thankfully, I think that trend is changing in business. And I've even seen things about no estimates, which I think is difficult for leadership people to kind of grasp. But even I'm kind of warming up to that a little bit too, because it's not that you're not necessarily estimating, you're just not putting numbers to it. You're counting the number of stories that a team is getting done in a given sprint to measure instead. And those stories might have a net average of 5 points. So that's why your point is that, hey, it's not, let's just count them. There's still going to need to be some way of measuring when you're going to be done. I can't think of any business that would not want to know that for their own fiscal planning. That's just the nature of the beast. So anyway, I think it's getting better.
Excellent. Chad?
Yeah, I think they pretty much covered it. It gets so much easier as you get more and more mature as a team, and I use it as not just a tool for reporting up to management, but as a lead on a project that has massive amount of integrations and everything else. As we got better and better at estimating, I got better and better at engaging other teams at the right time, right? So if I knew that once we had a series of estimations out there, I started to get into a comfortable cadence of okay, this is I can kind of see, just like a project manager, leadership, okay, in 3 months we'll have delivered this, and then I'll need to start planning for this next big wave of integration. So I have to engage with this team, within the next month to get blah, blah, blah. It really helped on these ridiculously huge projects. It really helps me plan better, and by that happening, it makes us look really good for the leadership folks on our project. If we're actually hitting our estimates, great. If we're actually engaging with other teams at the right time, awesome. And if we're actually showing value when we say we are, that just makes us look amazing. So, and also, last thought: work with Allison Lorenzo if you ever can. It's pretty nice.
Excellent. My last thought is, a promise is a prison. Don't make yourself another person's jailer by asking for a promise, and don't make yourself a prisoner by making promises.
Yeah.
A hard promise, you're going to break it, and that hurts, because you want things to go well. That's what I got. I don't know if that's any good or not, but I think with that, thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Dean, thanks for joining us the first time. I love your background, many guitars.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Steve, thanks. It was fun. Steve, thanks for joining us. Peter, Chad, thank you.
All right. See you guys.
And I think we'll shut her down. Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com, or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.